Hi, this is Shelly Cine, the historian and director of education for the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education. Thanks for joining us for Virtual Museum Day. I'm speaking to you from the Jewish Community Campus here in front of the memorial to the 6 million. I'd like to say a little bit about who we are at the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education and a little bit about this memorial that you see in the background. As we come together virtually to look at the museums in our community, I think it's also important to talk about community and what that's meant in Kansas City over the last decades. The monument that you see here is a really special piece that we have in our community. It was dedicated in 1963 by President Harry Truman, and it was commissioned and paid for entirely by the Kansas City Jewish community. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we see on this memorial today. If any of you have visited the Jewish Community Campus, you may have seen this and maybe didn't realize exactly what you were looking at and what a special piece of Holocaust history we have with us. This was actually one of the first Holocaust memorials in the United States. We can't really date which one was the absolute first, but this was one of the first ones. If we go around to the back side, which is where I'm standing now, you can see the aspect of the memorial that is the most clearly related to the Holocaust. What you see here is a very detailed model of the Warsaw Ghetto. And so when these survivors that came to the Kansas City community in the post-war period, they formed a club called the New Americans Club. And one of the things that they wanted to do was commission a memorial that remembered the people they had lost, and also the heroism of those who fought in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And so they knew they wanted it to feature the Warsaw Ghetto, and they knew they wanted an artist of national acclaim, and that is certainly what they got. So if we look here at the back, we can see the Warsaw Ghetto. And what makes this memorial pretty interesting is you can see that it's got very details in terms of the outline of the Warsaw Ghetto, and yet there's also a lot of symbolism happening at the same time. So it's both symbolic and very detailed at the same time. So when you look at this, one of the first things that captures your attention, I think, is the void within the ghetto. We see the ghetto walls, we see the map, but we also see that it's empty. And then our eye is next drawn to the people outside. These are the people who've been taken from the ghetto in the deportations that happened, and then also in the final ones following the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. But if you look, you can see this forced exodus of people from the ghetto into this fiery door, which would represent the fires of the death camp, specifically Treblinka, where many of the people taken from the Warsaw Ghetto were sent. If we pan up, we can see inscribed in the flames of the memorial the names of people who those in the survivor community here lost in the Holocaust. So these are all family members of those who survived. You'll also see present within the memorial this warrior imagery. You can see this warrior figure central, included in the flames, and that's to represent this burning desire, this burning need to remember and not forget what happened. If we move along the side, we can see an inscription, warning and witness, and then the words to remember. When we wrap around, we see these two sides are now connected. Here are these skeletal figures reaching out for remembrance, telling people to not forget what has happened. The front side is pretty interesting because it is a dual exodus. You can see, if we pan across here, we can see included the figures of Moses with a staff, and then above him King David, linking those two periods of Jewish history. But then also, this is all leading up towards the figure of this new American. So we see this as both referencing an ancient exodus and then also a more modern one, an exodus out of Europe into the New World, either that be America or Israel. If we look closely in this section, we can see here that peace, represented by the dove and the words here, have won out over the vehicles of war, which you can see right there. And of course also the importance of the Torah, shown up here. And again, more of the names. And even though there's a lot happening in this memorial, one thing that is present from every angle is this warrior imagery, which calls us to remember. You can see a menorah here on the side, and originally, when this monument was first constructed, there were lights in it and it would be illuminated at night. You can see at the bottom, this is meant to look like it's rising out of the rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto. I should say too that the location that this monument is now at in Overland Park is the third location that it has been. Initially, it was dedicated at the old Jewish Community Center on Holmes on the Missouri side. And when it was originally made, there was a concrete base that looked like rocks, that also mirrored that idea of rising out of the rubble. Then it was moved to another location while this current one was being built. And then finally in the 1980s, the monument moved along with the completed Jewish Community Center here to Overland Park. This structure is entirely made of aluminum and is really very interesting in all of its details. So if you have visited the campus and not walked over to the edge of the parking lot here to look at it, I really encourage you to do so. It's a pretty special piece and includes a lot of really interesting details that deserve to be looked at more than once for sure. It's also interesting because a lot of the imagery on this memorial is very specifically Jewish, which of course makes sense to us. But if you look at the history of memorialization and Holocaust memorials in the post-war period, many of them were very generic and didn't include a lot of specific Jewish imagery and reference. One of the reasons this monument works well to feature during virtual museum day is the fact that the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education is not a museum in the standard way that many other institutions that you might be looking at today are. We are an educational outreach agency. We sponsor lectures, sometimes we partner with other institutions to bring in exhibits. We work with teachers and students and schools across the area, but we don't have a set exhibit that people can come and see regularly on a daily basis. We do have survivor profiles on our website, so when survivors came to the Kansas City community following the war, many of them settled here, and then in the 90s we took down their testimony either in video or audio files, and you can find those on our website, which will be linked here in the video. And you can hear their stories both about the Holocaust and also the post-war world and coming to Kansas City and what that Kansas City community meant to them. And like I said earlier, this is one of the first, this is one of the things that part of that community wanted to do, is memorialize their experience, and specifically those that they had lost during this time period. So it's very special that we have this here, and it's something that we can come together and remember.